Hi there. My name's Nick Watson, and I'm going to be diving into Unit 12 on why markets don't always produce the best outcomes and what we can do about that. Economists have argued that markets follow our own incentives and we unintentionally coordinate with millions of strangers, and prices act like signals. But that system only works when prices tell the whole story. When they don't, when part of the cost or benefits is off the books, we get market failure. And that's what this presentation is about. What we're going to be talking about today are externalities, what they are and why they matter, how economists visualize them using some graphs, real world examples of them like pesticides, antibiotic research, and then private solutions in cohesion bargaining, government policy tools and how the government can put limits and different kind of implementations on markets, and asymmetric information, adverse selection and moral hazard, and finally moral and social limits of markets. Let's start by looking at Adam Smith versus the real world. Adam Smith and Hayek had different ways of describing supply and demand. Smith's invisible hand works only if prices reflect every cost and benefit connected to a decision, and Hayek described the prices as messages that sometimes get scrambled. The graph on the left represents a perfect supply and demand graph with the quote-unquote perfect signals. The graph on the left shows the shaded part of dead weight loss, which is the scrambled signals that Hayek describes. Or the graph on the right shows the shaded part of dead weight loss, which is the scrambled signals. The one on the right is a core market failure where prices leave something important out. An externality is an effect on others that the market doesn't change for or compensate, or a decision that a person or a group of people makes for their own sake that has an accidental effect on other people or a group of people. An example of that is a smoker creating secondhand smoke. Their smoke leads to someone else getting smoke in their lungs, even though that's not what they're trying to do. Or a real life example of this was in Martinique, in Guadeloupe, where farmers were using pesticides to increase the production of bananas. But the fishermen ended up losing profit because the fish were harmed were some of the fish were killed off because of the pesticides used in the production of the bananas. So because the banana production increased using these pesticides, it accidentally caused a decrease in the fishing production. In each case, the decision maker doesn't face the full consequences, so the markets produce too much harm or too little good. For the MPC versus MSC graph, this is how economists visualize externalities, and the MPC curve is the cost that the producer personally faces, and the MSC curve is the true cost of society, so it's the MPC curve plus the external harm. So the gap between the curves shows the external cost, and the market outcome is where demand intersects the MPC, giving excessive output. The efficient outcome is where demand intersects MSC, giving a lower output. When decision makers only follow MPC, the market produces too much of the good, the point where MPC meets demand, but the social efficient level is where the MSC meets demand, And this difference creates a lot of overproduction in some products, social inefficiency, and deadweight loss, which is that little part in between the graphs where you have just money being lost. This entire visual shows exactly why the externalities cause market failure, and the producer sees only the part of the cost. We're going to take a deeper dive into the pesticide pollution case with the Martinique and Guadeloupe areas and show a graph of that. And the graph shows the real-life case of the Martinique and Guadeloupe pesticide incidents. And the banana plantations used a pesticide called chlordicone. The private cost of using it was low, which is the MPC, but the damage to the fishermen's health and income was high, which is the gap which is the line of the MSC. The gap between the two lines is the damage to the fishermen. And then on the graph, it pushes production far past the efficiency point, and plantations produced around 80,000 tons, which when the social efficiency level was closer to around like 38,000. And this is what negative externality looks like in the real world. Another example is antibiotic resistance, where antibiotics can create a very kind of externality, and the graph works in a similar way to the pollution case. Each patient taking extra antibiotics sees a personal benefit, but society pays an external cost when bacteria evolve the resistance. So kind of like the human body evolves to resist the antibiotic. And so it shifts towards a much higher MSC. Because the cost doesn't appear in the market price, antibiotic use is systematically too high because the amount of antibiotics you need, it goes up, causing the price to rise. This market failure affects the entire world. So this is one that's not just country, but it's the entire world wise getting a lot higher. Next, we have cohesion bargaining. Cohesion bargaining is a private solution to externalities. On this graph, the market produces at a point where the MPC intersects demand, which is too high because the producer does not account for the external harm. But if fishermen and plantations could negotiate, they would move leftward to an efficient output where the MSC intersects demand. That's the point where the total gains from trade are maximized. The shaded area between the MPC and MSC curves represent welfare gain from bargaining, essentially the value everyone gets if they negotiate successfully. So like a win-win solution, pretty much. Coase showed that if property rights are clear and bargaining costs are low, the exact same efficiency point can be reached no matter who owns the rights. The problem is that real-life bargaining usually struggles because of high transaction costs, large numbers of affected people, and enforcement issues. This is why the government has to step in. So because the bargaining usually fails, the government has to step in, and each tool corresponds to a different shift in the graph. So regulation is a direct restrict output to efficiency level. So the graph moves left on the quantity axis. And Pigovian taxes add a tax equal to the vertical gap between the MSC and MPC. And this shifts the private cost curve upwards until it kind of reaches the MSC. And then the last restriction is subsides for positive externalities. For underprovided goods like vaccines, a subsidy shift private benefits up towards social benefits. And each tool tries to make the private decision makers see the true social cost. So then we have missing markets and incomplete contracts. And in this, externalities often exist simply because there's no market for the thing being demanded. And it's kind of like you can't buy or sell air, like noise levels or like effectiveness of a drug. And it or contracts can list every possible action or outcome, especially when they're difficult to observe. And this is where the MSC and MPC curves diverge, and the market doesn't have any mechanism to connect buyers or sellers over these missing pieces. And then we go take a look at the public goods graph, which shows a different failure, and that is because they're non-rival, and which means that your use doesn't reduce my use, meaning like we're both using it as much as we possibly can and it doesn't affect each other. And then it's non-excludable, so like because it's public, it's like one person can't keep someone out of the product. On a graph, we add people's willingness to pay verticality because everyone can consume the same unit simultaneously. And the efficient level is much higher than what private markets provide because no individual buyer captures the full benefit. And this is why you need the government provision. Next, we have two small graphs for asymmetric information. And these are the kind of the hidden attributes and hidden actions. The hidden attributes are where buyers assume that a product is bad and the demand curve shifts downwards. So like your original demand curve's higher, the second one's going to be a lot lower. And this means only low quality sellers remain on the market, which causes it to unravel. And then for the second one, it is moral hazard. So hidden actions involve insurance, and because of the insurance, people take more risks, and because risks increase, it just makes the market end up crashing as well, because the companies have to charge more for insurance because of the risks increasing. And these internal externalities are hidden risks passed on to someone else. Then we also have credit market failures, where lenders can borrow, or lenders are uncertain of the borrower's behavior, and it causes them to kind of charge more for something being borrowed, like in the case of banks, where interest rates increase because banks need to make up for the lenders not being reliable. This is an example where information gaps push the market away from the socially efficient point, and it also adds hidden risk. On markets, not every allocation problem should be solved by buying and selling, and some markets violate social and ethical norms, like in kind of like illegal markets, like buying organs or like buying babies with better genetics or something like that. And some goods are also considered merit goods, things society wants everyone to have regardless of income, like basic education and emergency care, child protection and stuff. And these limits aren't like graphable, it's just they're just values. All right, to wrap everything up, markets are powerful, but they're not consistent and reliable. Whenever prices fail to reflect the true social costs of benefits, the MPC and MSC curves split and inefficiency appears. We've seen how this happens with pollution, antibiotics, public goods, and asymmetric information. Both private bargaining and government policy try and close that gap. Sometimes they succeed, and sometimes they face the same limitations that the problem is facing. And finally, society sometimes chooses not to let markets operate at all. And thank you for listening.